Well, Star Trek Discovery had them in Season 1. They are, of course, the Tardigrades. Brad and I are talking about their real-life counterparts today because Isreal might have just put them on the moon.
With Dr. Brad Tucker and Matt Miller, this is Talkin' Science on Trekzone.
Well, welcome to Talkin' Science. It's Tuesday. Vegas or bust is done. We're back in the studio. Brad's almost back at the office. Happy Tuesday to you, Brad.
Yeah, how's it going?
Really good, really good. Sounds like you're under the pump. We've been chatting off air.
Yeah. It's National Science Week, which is great. It means people like me are extremely busy, even busier than normal. But it's great because it also means that lots of people get chances to do fun and exciting space things or science things that maybe they wouldn't do. So I was just in Cairns where we had almost 250 people, about 230, 250 for a talk and stargazing. So it was perfect. And it was a great view of the moon and Saturn.
Yeah, I saw those images that you posted on Facebook. Beautiful moon. And that was just through your phone and the telescope.
Yeah, that's just a phone through a telescope. So last night was what we call an occultation. So that is when kind of an object essentially eclipses or passes behind another. So in this case, we had the occultation of Saturn and the moon. So when the night started out, the Saturn was like barely just visible with the moon. And then over the course of even an hour, it moved from being right next to it to actually further and further away. So it was kind of cool to show some of the kids that, hey, look now and then look for an hour. Hey, things move differently in space. You just saw it with your own eyes.
I must admit, I really need to get my telescope out and start looking back at the sky again.
That's right. Yeah. No, and it was great, and because it's Cairns, they have good weather.
Good weather for winter compared to Canberra, hey?
That's right. It was a very balmy 19 degrees versus the 5 it was in Canberra or whatever when I landed. 3, sorry.
It was beautiful coming back from Hawaii last night. We transited through Hawaii and we went from 30-degree balmy temperatures to a casual 15 up here in Brisbane last night. It was beautiful. Hey, something else that might be beautiful are these thousands of tardigrades or water bears that could be on the moon.
Yeah. So firstly, tardigrades or water bears are they're what we call extremophiles. They're animals or creatures or things that can survive in extreme conditions. And their tardigrade is quite special because it's like an extremophile. It can survive super hot temperatures. They've almost like melted the things. They've frozen them. They've actually thrown it at the airlock. Like they put it into the vacuum of space. And these things just survive. They're just kind of these indestructible creatures.
Now, in Star Trek Discovery, in the latest Star Trek series, and this is why I'm really interested in this story, they were used to transport our ship across dimensions and across space-time. Obviously, tardigrades on a larger scale, but these guys are just as remarkable in the real world, aren't they? They're just being able to be melted and frozen and thrown out an airlock, and they still survive. Should we be worried?
And we're not even talking about like surviving for minutes. They can survive for decades. And this is the problem. So Isreal, we talked about when they tried to land on the moon earlier this year in about April, and they had a hard landing, as we say in the lingo. Yeah,
the technical term.
What they didn't really tell anyone was that they had a little kind of capsule experiment where it actually had some human DNA, and it had also, among other things, these tardigrades. And so it was kind of this idea that maybe they can preserve things into the future. The problem is they were carrying tardigrades, and it crashed on the moon. And there's a very strong idea that some of them have a likelihood of surviving.
What does this mean for the moon?
Yeah, so this is one of the tricks, is right. So they're kind of almost unchecked. Now, obviously, one of the things that's never been tested is kind of all of the conditions at once, right? Usually they've only been frozen or melted or vacuum. So they were also dehydrated on the way down, and that helps them be preserved. So it's really weird, creepy stuff. And so again, we don't know if they really survive or how many would survive. However, there is no reason to think that those who can't or did survive just would remain unchecked. And in fact, it's been shown that they can actually breed. Now, they do have to be a bit rehydrated. That's one of the things that helps them be preserved and kind of almost in stasis almost. Now, the moon does have ice. There is a way that maybe they will. So water bears, the way they get their name is they extract the film off moss, essentially, or water, kind of that film off water. So you can imagine they potentially, if they crashed in the right spot, could extract this off some nearby ice in the crater. We're getting very hypothetical, and rehydrate and then reproduce on the moon.
So we might not be the first organisms from Earth to create a colony up there.
That's exactly right. I mean, the moon actually could be contaminated right now, and it's to the ire of of a lot of people. Or there are actually treaties that say essentially don't do what Israel did, and they did what Israel did. I mean, if you just think about it, like Cassini, the Cassini mission, just to prevent any possible contamination of the nearby moons of Saturn, like Titan, it was crashed into Saturn, which caused the nuclear reactor to explode. It was then heated up through the friction as it was ascending, and then gravity crushed it. So NASA destroyed their probe 3 different ways to make sure nothing got out of Saturn. And here it's kind of like, oh, oops. It's a big thing.
So what does this mean for Israel and future collaborative missions, manned missions out into the solar system? Does this sort of...
I think it has a few people wondering, it's how kind of, whether there's formal punishment or whatever, it'll be interesting to see. I think, what it just shows is that there really is this need for big oversight and more control over what we do, especially when we're talking about going to the moon. We really have to be careful and it's not just careful, right? There's a lot of ethical questions. We shouldn't be doing this, and we should be really conscious of what we do out in space and not reckless. And this is just kind of a sign that as space becomes more and more accessible, which can be very good, it also means not everyone is thinking about all these things and can just say, oh, she'd be right. And no, she not be right.
Get exclusive access to podcast and behind-the-scenes info by becoming a member on Patreon today. Supporting Australia's unofficial home of Star Trek gets even better with membership starting at just $1 per month. Jump over to patreon.com/TrekZone.org.au.
The Earth's magnetic poles, and some new research has discovered that it took a little bit longer for the poles to shift last time around.
Yeah, so just for reference, we have 2 poles actually. We have what we call geographic, or kind of the pole where it's north, and that's the position where we rotate along our axis. But then there's also magnetic north, and that is that inside our Earth we have this iron core spinning around it. This generates this nice magnetic field that keeps us safe from harmful radiation from the sun and helps produce beautiful aurora. But magnetic north is not the same as geographic north. So if you were to follow your compass purely to north, you will not end up at the North Pole. You'll end up near it. And in fact, it's been shown in the past really just a few years, the magnetic pole is shifting quite dramatically. It's gone from near Greenland almost to all the way over to Scandinavia. So it's really been wobbling around, and it's quite interesting about what's happening. Now, we also know that the Earth's poles have flipped in the past. Geologists have looked at rocks, and you can actually see when north changes and when south changes. And so obviously a good, part of fan fiction and science fiction is not only do the poles flip, but they flip almost immediately, cause havoc, and then some sort of gruff superhero needs to save the day. Well, this research is showing it doesn't happen that fast, which is good for us.
So what does a shifting magnetic pole mean for life on Earth in 2019?
So it's interesting, right? So let's say it shifted quite dramatically. Well, let's say then it shifted so north and south are kind of along the equator. Well, what that actually really means is that the magnetic field line strength is actually weakest at the North and South Pole. This actually means where you get a lot more radiation. Now, it's not enough where it actually kills people, because obviously people live near the North Pole and we have people on the South Pole. However, you do get exposed to more radiation, and you get things like aurora. So instead of having like the northern and southern lights, you would have like the Ecuadorian lights. So that would be kind of weird. Anything relying on magnetic navigation, things even from GPS to compasses, will have to be recalibrated, because your north is not north. Your north would be west or east, but you need to go north. So navigation would be a lot trickier. And then there's also the natural world, where a lot of things, even from like how animals move around to how some plants grow, is reliant on the nature of the magnetic poles being where they are. So it really would change it. It wouldn't destroy the Earth overnight. It wouldn't even destroy the Earth, because it's happened in the past, and clearly the Earth has survived this.
What I found really interesting about this one is that scientists were studying volcanic lava flows from a volcano in Chile in 1993 to discover this process, and that it took 22,000 years as opposed to the 1,000 to 10,000 years that was originally thought.
That's right. And so this is kind of the big thing, is people have looked at signs in the lava flows or the rocks, and hey, here it says, all right, well, it's actually not as fast as even the previous studies shown, and that it does appear to be a gradual process. And so when you're thinking about not just a few thousand years, but tens to hundreds of thousands of years, that's not really on the scale of a human history, kind of, right? If you think back 1,000 years ago, how different the world was from today. So it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to dramatically change it. But again, it's still quite interesting scientifically why this magnetic pole is wobbling around immeasurably and quite quickly.
New content is being added all the time to Trekzone's YouTube channel, Talking Science with Dr. Brad Tucker on Tuesdays, Trekzone Live on Thursdays, and a Trekzone Conversation on Saturdays. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe and ring the bell to get fresh public releases.
Dead planets and zombie signals. This is a really interesting article that you sent me.
So yeah, it's quite interesting, because when we think about planets around other stars, it actually turned out that the very first planet around another star was really terrible. So this was a planetary system around a pulsar. So pulsars are white dwarfs, so something our sun will be in billions of years, but they're magnetically essentially supercharged, and they release beams of magnetic energy and radiation out. Now, what this means is it kind of just blasts the nearby solar system it's in, and again, that's not very good, and it can strip away the outer atmosphere and all sorts of things. Well, when you find the planet around it, it's probably not habitable. And in fact, it probably doesn't have much stuff on it. The atmosphere would have been blown away, even some of the ground. And so you're kind of just left with the core of the planet. And so, in fact, the people who discovered the first planet said, maybe this is actually a good thing to go. Now that we know planets are common, we actually want to see the cores of planets, but we actually know here's a core of a planet. What does it look like? We
can draw some parallels here, can't we, to our solar system, to our star. This is sort of the way that we're going to go. Probably not in humanity's lifetime, but what does it mean for us?
So I think what it's trying to show is, how do we get an insight potentially into the insides of planets? Also, as our sun grows, it will expand to a red giant. It will swallow up, say, things like Mercury and Venus and Earth, but it will really blast away Mars. So what will Mars look like in the future? We know that these things happen. And then also, what is just the pure likelihood that things like life could be sustained? Could we actually have something living on this in the off chance? Could there be any sort of ingredient? So they want to use radio telescopes to look at magnetic interference or any residual signals from this planet. Because, we do know that even though our planet's nice now, it wasn't in the past and it won't be in the future. And to get that snapshot, just as we get snapshot of different stars at different ages, we need snapshots at different planets at different ages. So we look at the baby planets being born, and you also kind of want to look at the dead planets.
And have we found one of these dead planets as of yet?
So yes, so we think the first planet is mostly dead. There appears to be more and more, but also what their argument is that since planets are now so common, right? Again, 1992, they discovered literally the first planet around another star. So now they're saying, all right, well, we kind of just now know planets are common anyway. Why don't we look at the systems that are really harsh, look for planets there and study them in great detail to see some of these bad zombie dead planets.
Fantastic, Brad. As always, it's fascinating to talk science with you, and I'm looking forward to doing it next week.
Sounds good.
You can get social with Trekzone. Australia's unofficial home of Star Trek is everywhere you are. Get the wrap-up on our Facebook page. Keep in the loop on Twitter and relive Trek episodes on Instagram. Just search for Trekzone.